from where we left last time. Today, what are we going to touch base on? What are we going to workshop ourselves on? Yes, and today we also have a very interesting topic to talk about, which is the issue of culture. When I look at the culture, it's something that is more very close to the topic that we spoke about last time, which was the issue of religion. So, Mr. Accountant Property Guy, every time when we start with our podcast, we do a disclaimer that indicates that whatever that we are talking about is normally our perception, our view, and that shouldn't say that we are putting a final stamp, and we are open for further engagement on all our topics that we spoke about. So even when we discuss, or even when we talk to ourselves, training ourselves today on this topic, we just want to emphasize that so that it is clear and people shouldn't misunderstand. But in a nutshell, Accountant Property Guy, what culture? What's your definition of a culture? What is your understanding about this culture thing? I did a little bit of research and also trying to be practical. I mean practical in terms of looking at where I grew up, looking at adversity. At that time we also met different people coming from different provinces and stuff like that. So the definition that I'm about to give is purely on more practical than what the Google definition says. My understanding about culture, according to me, emanates from a standard or practices from a particular community, if not a family, where they come up with some habits or some practices that will make things easier for them to understand one another, for them to put an order or to put a protocol in terms of how certain things needs to be done in such a way that the other people will also feel respected, or the other people will still feel like it is acceptable to do things in a particular manner. So in a way, then culture is more about simplifying things for the people that are living together, and also making sure that actually, for me, the ultimate goal was to limit unnecessary conflicts, limit unnecessary misunderstanding, limit unnecessary argument. Because if we were to come up with certain habits, beliefs, practices that we all agree on, so in that way we should be able to move faster without having to come back and explain to one another. Someone say, when you do things in this way, I felt. Some will say disrespected, some say I felt misunderstood, such things. So at the end of the day, meaning that culture, it's not something that is fixed, or it's not something that one can say there is a definite definition, if I may say, on it. It should be a way or a formula or a method that people those who find themselves living together most of the time should agree on certain practice, beliefs, and the way of doing things. And as a result, one word for that, according to my belief, is that it end up being called a culture. So, Mr. Content Property Guy, if you agree, then we'll say we can have culture. There is a culture from a community, a culture from a particular tribe, a culture from organizations, a culture from different countries. So basically, where there is more than one people, according to my belief, there should be a way that they agree, they reach a consensus of doing certain things, treating each other in a certain way. And that, for me, in simplest term, that's what emanates culture. That's what should talk to the word culture. But let's now, Mr. Accountant Property Guy, expand on this to say, where is this culture in our recent, in our current moment, or in the 21st century? But hold on, before we even go there, perhaps let's touch base a little bit in terms of, I like what Mahatma Gandhi once said about this culture thing, because he says culture resides in the heart and in the soul of the people. So, which according to me, that explain or denotes that a culture is something that is a depth to the level of the spirituality, if I may say. It's so deep to an extent that, anything that touches the heart, anything that touches the soul, more or less, it's a spiritual matter. So, of course, the element or this topic about culture, it's a very sensitive subject, and like I said, we ought to have an understanding, or the bottom line, or the objective, because if the objective is missed, at the end of the day, the very same thing, that is culture, that was meant to do good, you will find it doing bad. And that's where I'm talking, that's where I'm going, because in our 21st century, we have a challenge of saying I remember very well that even in my office this year we had a debate talking about the very same issue of culture. Because if it is not understood, believe in me, it can still cause a huge damage. So it is better also in this podcast. Remember, in our podcast we said the ultimate goal of this podcast is for us to zoom in and bring a different view that is still neutral, but at the same time it should enlighten and show us to see things differently, and still find that at the end of the day in this world, Mr. Accountant Property Guy, I'm also, the other day I said I'm someone who believes that the coin has got three sides. It means that I don't believe that there should be only heads or tail, but the edge, I still believe that it is still a side, meaning that I can still stand on the edge and agree that there is heads and a tail, depending on the reasonability. So our ultimate goal on this podcast as well is to bring such, because we want to foster the issue of accommodating each other, to say there is nothing wrong if you are a cultural person, there is nothing wrong if you also believe that culture, it's according to you, perhaps it doesn't exist. But the bottom line is for us to understand that the ultimate goal of culture was to bring people together, understanding in terms of their understanding, in terms of practices, in terms of how do they believe certain things needs to be done. So yes, that is that. But now let's come to say, Mr. Accountant Property Guy, what are you saying? Do you think in our 21st century this issue of culture is doing what it's supposed to do? Is it bringing people together? Is it bringing the understanding? Is it still relevant, if you may be bold to bring such a question? Yes. My response, like I said, I would like to respond this way. I'm of the view that the culture, it's still relevant. The culture, it still serves its own purpose. However, and I say however, the challenge that I'm seeing is that most of us people, we want to chip into the culture when we feel like we want to redeem the benefits. But on the other hand, we are not feeding the culture. I'm saying this because there is a lot of things that we learned from our culture. But if you were to ask ourselves that are we still feeding the same culture that we believe on? And I would like to pose a very big question mark on that. And I'm of the view that most of us would like to believe in culture, but at the same time we are not feeding the culture. And I will say, for instance, let me be practical on that as well, because looking at our own, for instance, let's say our own government, the big question will be, do you think, are we doing enough to make sure that our culture is sustained, to make sure that our culture still remain relevant, our culture still serve the purpose that it ought to serve? According to me, I feel like there is a gap on that. A gap because there is only few moments, or only in a particular month when it's Heritage Month is when we celebrate that. And when you look, somebody once said, put your money where your mouth is. I don't know if I refresh, but put your money where your mouth is, something like that. That's where you will see, that's where we will see, or that's where we will measure if indeed the very same thing that you're talking about, it's more important or more valuable. So, of which when I look at it, I don't think so, because I mean our system of education, I don't see much nowadays more emphasis, more education on culture. And also I know in the past we used to have those traditional leaders, handling certain matters in communities and whatnot. But now when you look at the communities, we're more relying on courts and the modern. So that's my view on that. And I would like to also indicate that there is nothing wrong of doing things the modern way. There is nothing wrong of doing things the cultural way. However, the bottom line, it should be, at the end of the day, we need to fit what fit us. And yes, the same with the culture. If we believe the culture, we still want, let's not only redeem the benefits, but we must still invest in it. We must still take care of it. We must still, pay our dues to make sure that it remains sustainable, it remains relevant, and it remains fit. It fits to the 21st century. And another thing that I just want to add on this is that, and I want to be relevant to what is happening now, looking at this topic. I still find a challenge, especially on the issue of tribe, because the issue of tribe for me is so close, or is the secondary level where if you want to see this issue of culture. And for me, I still believe that there is still a huge discrimination as far as culture and tribe is concerned. Because immediately when you indicate that you are a particular tribe, automatically you are linked to a particular culture. And then all of a sudden that results to differences, and those differences, even if we were to go back to the history, we know very well our history, that we had some vendors, we have some paddies, they have to, when the issue of apartheid came, they had to fight in order to conquer a certain part of the land. So somehow I feel like that story was never concluded properly. And where we stand today, we still find those differences that set us or separate us. And that's where I'm coming in to say, let's zoom in and understand that culture is not something that it has been put in the box. I believe that culture is evolving. Culture is something that has to change. Culture is something that we ought to understand, that it's something that 2-3 people, group of people can dismantle it and come back and put it in such a way that it will make them to be efficient in terms of communicating, in terms of understanding, in terms of doing things, in terms of building the habits that will be acceptable amongst them. So in my parting shot on this interesting topic, I'm of the view that culture is not something that is permanent, something that remains the way it was in the 18th century, in those olden years, but it's something that we ought to keep on molding, amending, changing, because the ultimate goal is to say, wherever at this time, if we are living together, there should be a certain standard, certain customs, certain norms that we need to agree upon, and we stick together, we agree on them. And believe in me, there is power in unity, there is power in oneness, there is power if people are in agreement. And I can substantiate that by the scripture. Those who are the Bible readers, they know the story in the book of Acts in terms of what happened there when the Jews were in one accord, they were together, they were in agreement, they were able to do wonders, amazing things, miracles. They were able to do things that the way beyond. So we would like in this podcast, Mr. Accountant Property Guy, to encourage you to say, let's stay away. It's not good to isolate yourself or to befriend people based on the culture, to befriend only people because based on your culture. You must know that a culture can be remolded, can be adjusted, can be redone. Because at the end of the day, in this modern world, somebody once said, show me your network, then I will tell you what is your network. It's a very powerful statement there. So if you want to grow, you want to impact this world, then we cannot afford to misunderstand this concept of a culture, because we need to understand that if we find we come from a different culture, different background, then let's remold, let's come together and form a new culture that is best, that makes us to move forward, that makes us to be efficient. And with that, in simple terms, I think that was my parting shot. I'm out.